Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we're looking at my Phalaenopsis Mini Tris. This is one of my favorite orchids. It's a cross between bellina coerulea and equestris coerulea. So this orchid came to me already with 2 flower spikes. And it had already bloomed, and this time around in 2020, back in April, both spikes were putting out a bud. So it was pretty interesting to see, which spike actually would bloom first, because it's not always the oldest spike would have a first blooming flower for that particular cycle. This orchid is really fragrant, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that bellina is the pod parent. And this is a coerulea type, so it's extra interesting to me because I have equestris coerulea in my collection, but the light purple is just it's light. It's not very intense on the lip. So I think a lot of the purple color that you see here, the coerulea, really comes from the bellina part. I also have another orchid that is a cross between equestris and bellina, but the name tag that came with the orchid is equestris cross with bellina. So that one, because the pollen is from bellina, and this one, the pollen is from equestris, so they actually have very different flowers, even though they have the same kind of parent. But the fact that one has bellina as the pollen parent and the other one has bellina as the pod parent, the results are completely different. But they're both really vigorous orchid, and I think that's because of the equestris in them. Its fragrance is very much after the bellina fragrance. It's really sweet, and to a point where it would make me want to smell this orchid multiple times a day. But the fragrance will start to dissipate somewhere around 2 p.m., 3 p.m. And then in the early evening, you pretty much cannot detect any fragrance. And then the next morning, it will become fragrant again. And usually, I notice that when there is enough sunlight, and if I just open the window just a tad to encourage some extra ventilation, a little bit extra airflow, the fragrance will intensify. So it's a very nice orchid to have. Any kind of bellina cross, I will say, will give you that sweet fragrance. And here is just a quick reminder, since we're having a sequential bloomer here. If you're new to this orchid hobby, and if you know your orchid is a sequential bloomer, when the flower spikes are still green, make sure you don't cut them, because they may continue to grow and give you more flower. Sometimes the same year, sometimes they do wait until the next year's flowering cycle to give you more bloom. But I have had orchids that surprise me mid-year when they're not supposed to bloom, but they do. But then some orchids hold on to their older spikes until next year to give you more bloom. So make sure you don't cut the spikes. And if you don't know if your orchid is a sequential bloomer or not, just do some online research. And sometimes before you purchase certain orchids, the sellers would know. So that's something you can ask the sellers too. And here is just a quick video clip to show you what the orchid looked like when it was in bloom. So you can see there were some roots growing, and the reason I didn't repot this orchid right after I purchased it was because at that time there were 2 spikes, and pretty quickly after I got them, the first 30 days I would never repot an orchid, and then after that it was starting to put out buds. So I did not want to disturb the orchid. And now that it's doing the same thing again, it's blooming again, so I'm gonna have to wait. Another big reason is I looked at the medium. The spectrum moss was still looking pretty okay, so I didn't think it was the time to repot just yet. Of course, if you detect any pest infestations, any potential bug problems, or even root problems on a newly acquired orchid, you should repot. But for me, it was looking okay, so I decided to wait more. So as the second flower was about to fade away, it put out another bud quickly at the end of May 2020. So this is the third flower that this orchid gave me during this particular flowering cycle. So 2 flower spikes and 3 flowers this time around. One thing interesting about sequential bloomer is because it's bloomed sequentially. Like this one, for example, it started to pull out buds in early April, and then now we're at end of May 2020. It was still in bloom. So during this whole time, in order to avoid bud blast, I was literally only adding certain amount of water to it, and it takes experience to know which orchid requires X amount of water. So what I do is I only give the amount that it would need for that particular watering cycle. So I add to it, but then I don't move it, because if you add too much water, you may have to take it out, dump out the excess water. So I didn't want to do that. I did not want to disturb the orchid. Okay, so this is a clip. This is now mid-June. So see, beginning of April to mid-June. So we're talking about 2.5 months of this orchid in bloom. It might have gone for a little longer than mid-June. But anyway, let's just say 2.5 months. So that's a long time. Even though every time you get 1 or 2 flowers, that's still a long time not to move this orchid around or dump out any water if you have excess water. And that's why I choose to, I guess, just limit the amount of water I give to this orchid every single time. Overall, I really adore this orchid for that it has bellina smell and very interesting color. If you don't have one, you should definitely check it out and see if you can get one. It's a really nice one to have. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!